Greetings, welcome to Hexed Encountered. My name is Joe. Today we're going to be continuing our Flying Pig Games February, and that means we're going with Old School Tactical Volume 3. This is, as you probably guessed from the title, the third volume of this series, which you could make a strong argument is probably Flying Pig Games' flagship series. So Old School Tactical, squad level, tactical game. This is, as I mentioned, Volume 3. Volume 1 was Eastern Front, Soviets and Germans. Volume 2 was Western Front, Americans and Germans, basically. And Volume 3 here is the United States Marine Corps and Army against the Imperial Japanese Army and their Special Naval Landing Forces, essentially the Japanese Marines. So this is, as I mentioned, a squad-level tactical game. Based on the title, if you're not familiar with this series, based on the title, you can probably glean the fact that it is very much in the vein of your, classic tactical games such as, Squad Leader, Advanced Squad Leader, and some of the other games from way back when. It's a system that is very clean. It's got enough quote unquote chrome. I don't really like that term, but it's a familiar one for many wargamers. So it's got a lot of that stuff in it, so that you can kind of, it kind of covers everything that you would expect it to cover from a tactical standpoint. So the previous two games in the series I did were Platoon Commander Deluxe and Armageddon War, and both of those are platoon level tactical games. So this gets a little bit more granular, gets down to the squad level, and there is the base game, and there's also an expansion called Hellbent, and there will be at least another video or two, probably two, on Hellbent as well, which actually expands the game to some of the island hopping stuff. So there are other scenarios. This one is mainly, there's Guadalcanal, there's Bougainville, there's, a few different kind of South Pacific, New Guinea, stuff like that in that area. So, several of the early scenarios are in Guadalcanal, which is, a good starting point for any Pacific game, because obviously that was the first real combat for the U.S. Marines against the Japanese. Hard-fought battle for Henderson Field and all that stuff, that if you are a follower of the Second World War, you are certainly familiar with that particular campaign. So we are going to play a scenario called Scenario 5, and it's called the Old Breed. So here we have a look at our scenario that we're going to be playing, the Old Breed, scenario number 5, September 11th, 1942, Guadalcanal. First Marine Division was stocked with many long-serving Marines. Many had experience in Central American dust-ups, but this was different. As the defensive perimeter was set up around Henderson Airfield, U.S. manpower was stretched thin, too thin in a lot of places. In one such section of this perimeter, a small group of old-timers would have to fight for survival. The small Marine listening post tempted the Japanese soldiers probing the line. They chose to push hard and overrun the Americans. It's a 5-turn scenario using map 6, which is the map that comes with this game. Map coordinates, we'll talk about that in a moment. It's a small portion of this map, which is a very large map. This is, I believe, 30 by 41 inches or some such. So it is a big one. There are no control hexes. This is an attempt by the Japanese basically to eliminate the Marines. Off-board assets, there are none, so that would be things like airstrikes and off-board artillery strikes. Special rules, it is a night scenario, so visibility and line of sight is limited to 3 hexes. The U.S. player sets up first. The U.S. forces are elite. The U.S. player has 2 star shells available, and the U.S. forces may not exit the map. Victory conditions: to win, the Japanese player must eliminate every Marine squad and the medium machine gun. U.S. player wins by denying a Japanese victory. Here we have our forces. The Japanese forces, the 28th Infantry Regiment, 10 rifles, 3 sappers, 1 lieutenant, 2 sergeants, 3 light machine guns, 3 satchels. They set up on turn 5. This game counts down, so it's a 5-turn scenario starting on turn 5. And they set up anywhere on the north, east, and south map edges. And on turn 4, which would be the second turn of the game, they will get reinforcements, 2 rifle squads, 1 sapper, 1 sergeant, an additional light machine gun, and another satchel rather. Sorry. The gut check. So you can see the Japanese gut check here. That is, and the X. So if you've played volumes 1 or 2, you will be familiar with the gut check. Basically, when you take a damage in combat, you might have to make a gut check. And that's just basically determines whether or not you become shaken. The Japanese do not take gut checks. If you're familiar with the Japanese forces in World War II, they were, to say they were reluctant to surrender would be an understatement. They are extremely disciplined and willing to fight to the death, and it takes a whole lot to shake them up. So they are not able to be shaken or broken. These guys are tough and they are fanatical, for lack of a better word. So they don't have a gut check number. Impulse points. This game runs on alternating impulses, essentially. You do roll for initiative. The side that has initiative will get to go first, or if they have fewer impulse points than their opponent, they can actually pass. But the impulse points, you spend them to do things like moving, firing, as well as things like trying to rally your units, building cover, and some other stuff as well. So the Japanese will roll 2d6 and add 2 to that roll. That will be their impulse. Once they get their additional forces, they get another impulse die. So and then the American forces, they're at the bottom. It's a little bit harder to see here, but if we move this up a little bit, you can see they are gut check of 6. So you roll 2 dice, and if you roll that number or higher, you don't shake or break. You just gut it out. Impulse points, they use 1d6 and add 3. So that's how you have it. So I'm going to set up all the pieces. We'll come back in a second, and I'll explain the setup, and then we'll get some gameplay in. Okay, so we've got everything set up here. One thing I want to mention is these luck cards. So each side gets 1 luck card. Japanese get mortar attack, and these don't cost an impulse to use. You can use them and then actually spend impulse points like you normally would for that turn, or phase, I guess. Launch a mortar attack on the enemy. Target hex must be in line of sight of a good order unit. And yeah, so that's pretty useful. And the US has Born Lucky. Disregard any single attack on one of your units. Play after enemy rolls attack and gets effect. Maybe used for a vehicle. There are no vehicles in this scenario, but this is a very useful card. These other cards you might notice here, our leader card here, for example, these are kind of unit information cards, which are pretty useful in general. Because, I mean, some of this stuff is actually explained. You can see it on the counter itself. But you can also it also tells you all the, kind of rules that apply to that. So that's pretty useful, especially when you start getting into not as much this stuff, although you do have, like, for the sapper, like, what can a sapper do? He gets a +1 in melee, can use flamethrowers, detect and remove mines, remove obstacles, and use smoke. Okay. Rifle squad, on the other hand, just says +1 melee, in addition to their normal info. And, of course, the Marines have some. We have Marines and Marine leaders. There's also this one for the medium machine gun, which just tells you its firepower, range, and defense, and that it's a crude weapon. So the 2 is when the unit that's crewing it is reduced. So pretty useful. The game comes with 4 dice, 2 black, 2 white. So the first thing we do is we mark the turn marker, and that's off board. So the markers and tracks on this game are all around the perimeter of the game, so on the outside edges. So they're not actually going to be in the shot. I want it to be tight on the counters so that you could kind of see gameplay. I can obviously tell you what the impulse point status is for each team and what turn we're in and all that stuff in other ways with graphics or just by actually mentioning it. So we're ready to begin. So you start with turn marker. We're on turn number 5. As I said, we count down. Reinforcements, there aren't any yet. That'll happen in turn 4. Attach leaders and weapons. So in theory, you're supposed to say, well, here's Sergeant Akeda. He is attached to this rifle squad. So even though he's got 2 rifle squads in the same hex with him, because you can stack 2 squads together, he's attached to the first squad, the top squad. Okay? And then they have a number in the corner. That's their command range. And so that anybody within 2 hexes of him can be in command. Over here we have Lieutenant Kusanagi. His command range is 3. So he actually can command all 3 of these hexes, and he is also attached to he's actually attached to a sapper. Which I think that's okay. And then we have Sergeant Inoue down here, who's attached to a rifle squad as well. Just in case, I'm going to put Kusanagi with the rifle squad. So that's the Japanese setup. The Marines have 1 leader, Sergeant Guzman here. So his range is 2, and he's got a stack here with 1 unit and the medium machine gun, and they are in a trench, which gives them a +2 for defense. We have wire. So wire will have an impact on any Japanese unit that gets into it, or an American unit if they were to go forward, which they won't in this scenario. Sergeant Guzman is stacked with a Marine squad with no defensive benefit. We have, as I mentioned, we have a couple of foxholes, we have a trench, and we have 3 wire. So I decided to put this unit here, and I'm going to try to attempt to build cover, and so we can go through that, and I can show you how that mechanic works. The main purpose of this scenario is to show you how the game works for those who haven't seen Old School Tactical before, and also maybe for those who have seen it but haven't seen some of the special rules that come with Volume 3, because we're now covering the Pacific, and obviously you have different terrain, but you also have the Japanese who have their own special rules like bonsai, and they're, not needing to take a gut check and all that stuff. So, moving around the horn here, so Guzman is with a rifle squad. They're actually in the open. But we do have line of sight is only 3 hexes. So, this is kind of a calculated risk, so to speak. Then down here we have another Marine squad. They are in foxholes, and they have a Browning. The BAR. Wire. Over here we have 2 Marine squads and a satchel charge. Satchel charges can be thrown into the adjacent hex. It goes off and it attacks every unit in the hex. Typical fire combat, you pick a target in that hex and you fire at that target only. If you are attacking a unit that has an attached leader, it is possible if the unit takes damage, the leader can become a casualty as well. So we will pick up and begin here, or moving on rather. So we attach leaders, weapons, then we do smoke counters where you reduce the smoke. We don't have any smoke yet. Scenario rolls, there are no special rolls for this scenario. Then we do the free, rally, and bog rolls. So vehicles can bog. There are no vehicles in this. Shaken units can rally. You would roll for that. We don't have any broken units or shaken units because we just started. Initiative roll. So we roll, both sides roll 2 dice. We'll use white, I guess, for Japan and black for the US. You roll all 4. You add them together, and white has 6 and black has 7, so the US wins initiative. Then you would roll for impulse points. So you have your initiative roll, then your impulse roll. So we will roll the US first. They got 1d6 plus 3. They get 5. So they have 5 impulse points, and I'll mark that on the track, which again is off camera. Now the Japanese get to roll 2 dice, and they get 2 added to that, and they get, this is going to be a quick turn because they only have 5 as well. So with 5 impulse points, it's hard to do a whole lot. So what do your impulse points buy you? Essentially, they allow you to do things like move and fire and some other stuff. So since the US won initiative, they get to go first. They're going to actually use their first impulse here to try to build cover here for Guzman and this Marine squad. So the way this works is we roll one die, black die. We'll roll one die. If we roll a 5 or a 6, we are successful. We rolled a 6. So what happens now is we build a cover here. And so here's my counter that says cover on it. And you can see it's a +1 to defense. So basically it's like a scrape, not a full foxhole. It's a scrape. And we'll put that in here. And they have a little bit of cover now. So that was good. That was what I was trying to do. So they spent 1 impulse point to do that. Now we go over to the Japanese and they get to do something. So they have Sergeant Ikeda here, who has 2 units with him. Now you might notice there's a crest line here. And the Marines are all on this small hill, except for this unit here. They're in the kunai grass in a foxhole. So if you're on the crest line, you can fire down. But if you're if you were here at the top of the hill, the plateau or whatever, you're off the crest line, you actually can't fire down and you can't be fired upon until somebody comes up onto the same elevation as you. Or if there was another hill over here and you had the range, you could fire across at the other hill. So I put my Marines on the border, border of the crest line, and 1 down below in the kunai grass in a foxhole. Good cover down there, obviously. So we have Sergeant Ikeda here to get back to the matter at hand. You can do what's called a group move if you have a leader attached. So we're going to do that. They're going to spend 2 impulse points for this. And he's going to move 1, 2, 3. And, we're going to move in here into the palms. So that's 4. That's their full movement. And when you use a leader, they use the movement points of the unit to which they're attached. So just to kind of go over what the stuff on the counters means. So the one here on the far right, or left rather, this 3, is their firepower. The 6 is their range. That 3 is their defense, and that's their movement factor. On a leader, this is their command range, defense, movement. So if they're moving by themselves, they use their 4. When they're attached to another unit, they use that unit's movement factor. They're the same, so it doesn't matter in this case, but that is how it goes. Now, when they moved, you put a moved marker on them. So units can either fire twice, or they can move and fire in either order. Fire, then move, move, then fire. They can do it either way, but they have to split those between 2 impulses. So they're moved, and they're now subject to fire by this Marines, which they will do so. They have a medium machine gun. So we add their 5 firepower. The Marines obviously had pretty good firepower. They have a 5. The machine gun adds 3. So you can add those together in this case. There are some where you have to choose one or the other. In this case, you can use both. So they're going to have an 8 firing on the Japanese, whose defense is a 3. And so that's a 5. Now we have to look at the terrain, and they are in palms, and their defense is +1. And it also degrades line of sight, but you don't use that in this case because they're adjacent. And the target is in that one. So you get the terrain benefit, but not the degradation due to line of sight. So there's a player aid, which kind of explains how the combat goes. So the first thing you do is you take your firepower and you subtract the defense, and then you start applying modifiers. So it's an adjacent target, you get a +1. It's not melee. Degraded line of sight, again, that does not apply in this case, but if there were 2 hexes away and there was degrading line of sight between them, it would apply. Shaken, they're not shaken, and we're not doing intensive fire. Intensive fire is if you're already marked used, you have no actions left, you can actually do intensive fire, and there's some penalties involved in that. Obviously a -1 here and a -1 here, and you also end up shaken because of it. So that's like desperate times demand desperate measures kind of situation. Moving fire, -1. So if you move and fire, you take a die roll modifier of -1. That's not applicable. Attached leader, they do not have that. Height advantage, they do have that. So they're going to get a +1 height advantage. None of the rest of these apply. The elite would apply in a melee. And that's it. Oh, leader casualty roll. If they take a casualty, the Japanese, their leader can be eliminated. So we will roll here. So you roll 2 dice. So again, we have an 8 attacking a 3. We get a +1 for adjacent and a +1 for height advantage. So that becomes 10. So we're in the... And again, I'm doing this largely to show you how the game works. This isn't necessarily the best move, but it's a good opportunity to show you combat. So it's going to be +7. So we're going to roll our 2 dice, and we get a 9, which is a good roll. High rolls in this game are good. So the 9 becomes a 10 because of the +1 there, and we're actually in the 6th column, I'm sorry. We're in the 6th column, and we get a +1 on the die roll. So we got a +1 for adjacent target to our firepower. That's why we're in the 6th column. 5 and 6 are the same, so it really didn't change anything. But a 9, if we go across, is an X. So it's actually a 10 with that, so it actually is still an X, but an X means elimination. So in this case, that means that our rifle squad here has been eliminated, and you track casualties as well, and that's 2 casualty points, because when you get 5 casualty points and then each multiple of 5 thereafter, it affects your rolling for your initiative rather. So they're going to stay fire, but now we have to roll to see if their leader is killed. So if the unit is destroyed, a roll of 1 to 3 will also destroy the leader. And it's a 1. So Akita has been killed as well. Akita, Sergeant Akita, I guess. Akita has also been killed. And so, yeah, so they're down to just 1 squad here now. And the Marines get a fired marker. And that costs them 1 impulse point. So they are down to 3, as are the Japanese. So we go back to Japan's turn now. Now, because these guys fired, they could fire again. So you have to keep that in mind if you're going to move these guys up. So maybe we move somebody over here. So let's go with... let's show you how the kunai grass impacts things, right? So we have Lieutenant Kusanagi here. And he's got 2 rifle squads, one of which is packing a light machine gun. So clear terrain costs 1 for foot. And then kunai grass actually costs 2. So they have a movement of 4. So if they move here, that uses 3 of their points. And then they could move here, which would put them back in clear terrain, but you get a defensive benefit for being in the kunai grass, and because there's kunai here and here, their actually line of sight is actually blocked, so these guys cannot fire on them, nor can they. So we're going to put this fired marker down, and because they moved 2 units together, that is 2 impulse points and moves them down to 1. Now we switch back to the Marines. And they don't really have anything they want to do. You know, these guys already built their cover. These guys can fire again. That's about the only thing we can do. So we might as well do that. So again, we're going to have an 8. Their defense is, I believe, a 3. So it's still 5. They are in palm, so they're going to get a +1 to their defense, which would make it a 4. So we're going to have a +4 here. Now, we still have adjacent target, so we're going to get a +1, and it's going to bump it back to a 5. And then we also still have the attached leader, so we're going to get a +1 on our die roll. So we're going to do this. We're going to roll, and we rolled an 11. So +1 is 12, so that's actually going to eliminate this unit too. Now, if it didn't, well, actually, no. Sorry. I almost misspoke there. I was going to show you what the used marker looks like, but we're going to get that anyway because the flip side of this says used, and this means that unit is done and can perform no more tasks. So the Americans are down to 2 impulse points. The Japanese are at 1. So let's see what they can do here. So the Japanese, now we have our sapper here. Now palms only cost 1 to move through, and kunai costs 2. So here's the thing, though. If we move into this hex, they will have line of sight. Actually, they won't, because you have to apply it, since it runs along the edge of this hex with kunai. That would remove, that would be, oh no, it would be degraded, but they would be in line of sight. Kind of, they have the BAR. This is a dicey move. But again, I'm trying to show you the different things that happen in the game. So he's going to move. He's only got a movement of 3, actually, so he can't even do that. He can move here. So he's going to move here. That'll be the end of their impulse points. We'll stick a moved marker on him. And that is that. Now it would be the Americans' turn. They don't really have anything to do because they don't have line of sight to these guys. This guy has no line of sight beyond 3 hexes either, so he can't see them. They can't see them because we have jungle in between. So that actually will end turn number 5, and we'll go to turn number 4. And I'll move the marker for that. And we're now on turn 4. And so we resume here, turn 4. And the next thing we're going to do is we go back to the top. We move the turn marker, reinforcements. Okay, so according to our scenario rules, we get some Japanese reinforcements here. So they are going to get a bunch, not a bunch, but some useful units here. And we need to decide where we want to put them. They can be on the north or east edges. So east or north. So I'm kind of inclined to go with east in this case. So we have a light machine gun, we have a satchel, we have a rifle, a sapper, Sergeant Miyake, and a second rifle. So let's take Sergeant Miyake. We're going to attach him to one of the rifle squads and give them a machine gun. And we're going to put them right here. He's got a command range of 2. Then we're going to take our sapper and give him the satchel charge, and he's going to go here. So that's the reinforcement phase. So now the Japanese will also get an additional impulse die. So that means they're going to roll 3 dice for impulse now. But first we have to roll for initiative. So no leader changes. We're not changing any weapons around. I forgot to clean up. That was a step I skipped. So let me do that real quick. Luckily, there's not a lot of them. Sometimes you end up with a whole bunch of markers you have to pull off. Okay, so getting back to business here, we'll do our initiative roll. The Americans have a 6, the Japanese have an 8. So the Japanese win initiative this time. And they get to roll 3 dice for their impulse points. They get an 8 plus 2 is 10. So they are at 10 impulse points. And now we'll roll for the Americans, who only get to roll 1 die. 1. That's terrible. Okay, so they're going to be kind of in a bit of a pickle here, apparently. Okay, so now we've done our 2 rolls. It's now start to play the turn. And so the Japanese have initiative. They have 10 impulse points. They're going to start moving. So let's show what the sappers can do here. So he's got 3. Actually, he can do it. This is a little dangerous, though, because we're going to expose ourselves to opportunity fire. And this guy is just a squad, right? Yes. If we move him here, preliminary to moving him here so that I can show you how they cut the wire, or attempt to cut the wire. But moving him here exposes him to fire from Sergeant Guzman, as well as the Marines here, which I think is just 1 squad. Yes, 1 squad with a BAR. We're going to have degrading fire either way. So line of sight degradation essentially is what I'm trying to say. So the way that works is when you have line of sight degraded, you lose 1 on your firepower modifier. So we know that it would be more beneficial to have this guy fire because he's got the Browning, and that gives him a 6 firepower, whereas this guy's just going to be a 5. So we'll have this unit fire. So they get a 6, and their defense is a 3. So that's a 3. But the degradation because of the line of sight means they get moved down by 1. So that makes it a 5-3. So that's 2. So again, the odds here are a lot better for the Japanese when it's only 2. They don't have a leader on either side. We don't have a height advantage because they're not on the hill. So it's just a 2. It's just a 2. So we'll roll our 2 dice for the Americans. They rolled a 12. So a 12 in the 2 column is an elimination. So I was trying to get him close enough that you could actually see what happens when you... so yeah, they're taking a beating. They're already at 6, which is going to hurt their roll for the next turn. Actually, they were at 5 before because of the leader. So I should have adjusted their roll, and I did not. So I'll remember to do that next turn. So we need to drop a fired marker on these guys because they have fired. And now it's the Americans' impulse. They're going to pass. They don't have anything to do. So they can pass because they have fewer impulse points. If they had more, they could pass but spend the impulse point to pass. So the Japanese, they moved 1, so they're down to 9 because they moved the sapper. So now let's try this. Let's try this again. We're going to take this sapper, and he's going to go 1, 2, 3. And again, because of the, well, yeah, because this is 2, because this counts, even though it's on the spine here, it counts as being degrading line of sight because of the kunai grass in this hex and that hex. So these 2 cannot, they have no line of sight to there. So they moved, and we'll mark that, or yeah, it's just 1 unit. He's a sapper, but he's got a satchel charge with him. So that moves them down to 8. We'll go back to the Americans. Again, they don't really have anything to do, so they're going to pass. Now we'll go back to the Japanese. And let's activate Sergeant Miyake's stack here. Or no, let's talk about jungle. So we'll take Sergeant Inoue here. He's got a couple rifle squads. So he's going to group move. And again, this costs 2, and you have to have a leader to do a group move. They do. So their movement is 4, and it costs 3 to go into a jungle hex unless there's a trail, and there is no trail in this hex. So what we could actually do is go here first, and then here. So now we're adjacent to the wire, and we'll talk about the wire when we might, because I think under here is clear. It is. So we may just avoid that. We can go here, which is jungle, next turn, not this turn because we've already moved, and you can only move once. But they don't have a shot, and they don't have a shot because of the jungle is blocking terrain. So that moves them down to 6 impulse points. Back to the Americans, they're still going to pass. So back to Japan again. Now we have Lieutenant Kusanagi here. Well, if he moves, what are they packing? They have a light machine gun. So let's move up here. Actually, no, we're going to move here. And that costs 2. Now I can move here and take fire, but then I would also be able to assault. I need to think about that a second here to decide if that's what I actually want to do in this case. Yeah, I forgot. You can only do a bonsai on your first impulse of a turn, so they can't do it this turn. What they can do is, now that they've moved, we're going to stop here. They can fire at them and vice versa because of where they're located. So these 2 can fire at each other. So we have opportunity fire. So or the possibility of opportunity fire. So here we have our moving unit, right? Now we can say they're moving in to actually assault this position, okay? And I could have done a bonsai attack, and we probably, or at least I will try to maybe get that in so you can see how that works, but that has to be declared and started on the first impulse of a turn. We're obviously beyond that right now. So, but we can say that these guys are moving in to assault this hex. Now, once they hit here, they're in line of sight, so these guys can declare opportunity fire. Opportunity fire costs impulse points. The Americans have 2 left. They have, in this hex, 1 unit that I believe is equipped, try to straighten this out, with a BAR, which it is. So it's 1 unit with a Browning, no leader. They can declare opportunity fire, and they may as well, because if they can inflict a casualty, we can't break or shake the Japanese, as we know, because that's their basically their unique faction rule, essentially. So the only way to stop them, because normally in Volume 1 and Volume 2, and if you were playing, if you were firing at the Americans, basically anybody but the Japanese, if they're moving and you fire on them and you get a break result or a shaken result, essentially they stop moving. In this case, the only way to stop them from moving is to actually inflict casualties, because otherwise they're going to get there and then we'll get melee, which takes place at the end of the turn. And the rules mention the reasoning for this is so that it won't change. Knowing the result of this could change some of your other strategy, essentially. So the idea being, we'll resolve that at the end. That way you play out the rest of the turn without trying to kind of accommodate the results of whatever happened here. So I think that's actually a wise decision, and definitely one I can get behind, so to speak. So they're moving. Their goal is assault here. They're going to fire. This would be their second fire action, which would make them used. So we do have our Browning here, as I mentioned. So we get 5 for the squad, 1 for the Browning. That is 6. They are their defense is a 4, rather a 3. It's a 3, and this is why I'm trying to use. Boy, this is why I'm trying to use tweezers. My fingers are big and I'm not all that nimble. So their defense is 4, their firepower is 6, so that's a difference of 2. Now, other things we have to take into account. So let's bring this handy dandy player aid card back in. Adjacent target, no. Melee, no. Degraded line of sight, no. Because even though this degrades line of sight, if they're in a hex that has terrain that degrades line of sight, they get the terrain bonus, not the degraded line of sight. No shaken. We're not doing intensive fire. So it stays in column 2. Okay. Die roll modifiers, moving fire. They're not moving. They don't have a leader attached. They don't have a height advantage. They're not on the hill. They're not on the crest line here. It's not an ambush, and none of this other stuff applies. Now our attackers do not. Oh, they do have a leader. Okay, so with them having a leader and them also having 2 rifle squads here, including a light machine gun, we're attacking the top unit, which is the unit to which Lieutenant Kusanagi is attached. That means that if we inflict a casualty on them, we get to roll to see if we take out the lieutenant as well. So let's roll for this sucker. So we're in column 2. We roll 2. We don't really have any modifiers here at all. And we rolled a 5, which is not going to do us any good. So here's a 5. We go across to the 2 column. It's a shaken result. Anybody but the Japanese, that would be good. In this case, not, because the Japanese cannot be shaken. So we mark them as used. And as they were prone to do, the Japanese are going to come at us. We're going to move them here. And then we're going to stop, and I'm going to drop a melee on here. Just so that basically I know, because otherwise I'll have like a 10 counter stack here. I'll just put the melee here with them adjacent and kind of leaning that way so that I know. And there's not a whole lot to keep track of here, so I will remember that we need to do this melee at the end of the turn. So the Americans used 1 impulse point for their fire, and the Japanese used 2 to move that unit. So our status now is Japanese 4 impulse points, Americans 1. Okay, so now we have a situation where can somebody else fire at these guys? And in theory, the answer to that is actually yes. These guys could fire at this unit as well, I believe. Although, well, actually they can't, because you can't do opportunity fire twice, basically, I don't think. At least not now that I've said, oh, the move is done and they have melee on there. And these guys here can't fire at this guy because the line of fire would go through this degrading, and there's two of them. Because if you cross any hex side of, basically, let's see. Let's just move these guys up one hex so that we can see. So we have this one to here. Now, if you look at the line, it's going to cross through this hex. And then I think it also kind of nicks the edge of this one as well. I use this level to kind of level my camera, but in this case, we'll just do this. So it looks like it actually doesn't touch that hex. Interesting. So given that, let me put my melee counter back up here. All right. So given that, we could say, move these guys back. They can fire here. So you know what? Let's do it. Why not? So we don't get firepower for these guys. So it's just 5. It's just 5. They are a defense of 3. So that's the 2 column. Now look in here. It's not adjacent. So it's going to stay in the 2 column. None of this applies. Oh, actually, the degraded line of sight does apply. So they get a -1. So it's going to be in the 1 column. But they're going to get a +1 on the roll. Actually, they're going to get a +2 on the roll. So they're going to get a +2 on the roll, and it's column 1. So let's roll. And we get a 6. And as I mentioned, we get a +2 on the roll, which becomes an 8. So column 1, 8 is casualty. So casualty means they get reduced like that. And that's an additional casualty point for the Japanese. And these guys get a fired marker. And that's the last impulse point for the Americans. So they're done. We go back to the Japanese. They have 4 left. So let's take this guy, Sergeant Miyake here, and we'll do a group move 1, 3. Stop there. That's 2. The Americans don't have any points, so we get to move again. We have these 2 here. But actually, maybe we should just move the sapper. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, he's only got 3. That's right. So 1, 2, 3. Now palms do degrade line of sight. So if this guy was to fire next turn, because he can't fire this turn, we're out of impulse points. If he fires next turn, 1, 2, 3. He's also at the very edge of line of sight. But so that leaves them with 1 impulse point. And we'll move our other sapper with that impulse point. So we'll go 1, 2, 3. So we're going to see if we're going to set up maybe a bonsai attack for next turn. Because if these guys survive this melee, we have an officer here. Well, we have the command range, right? He's got a 2. So he could actually take these 2 and do a bonsai if he wanted to, probably. But we'll see. We'll see. So that's going to end turn number 4. And we now have to do the melee phase. So melee is basically it's combat, of course. I'm just going to move these off so we can see everything. So we have the Americans. They have a firepower of 6, okay, and a defense of 4. The Japanese have a firepower of, what do they have? You total it up. So they have 6. They have 8, counting their machine gun. So reading through the rules, okay, 1 melee per hex per turn. All terrain and fortification modifiers are ignored, so they're not going to get any benefit from their fortification there. Moving fire is also ignored. Shaken units have half firepower, which does not apply here. Nobody's shaken. Broken units do not get an attack roll, also not applicable. Stacking limits are still followed, so we don't have a problem there. Attacks for each side are resolved simultaneously, so it's possible that all units may be destroyed. Each side adds up the defense numbers of all units in the melee to arrive at total defense. Trucks add their defense to melee, but no firepower. Each side adds up all HE attack firepower of all units to arrive at their total firepower. The two sides are compared. Each side's total firepower goes against the other side's total defense. This gives a column for which all units involved will use. Vehicles use their front defense. We don't need to worry about the vehicle stuff. Separate attack rolls are made against each enemy unit in the melee using the same column. Okay, so we know our firepower for the Americans is 6. Their total defense is 4. For the Japanese, we have a total attack of 8 and a total defense of 6. 7, actually, because the leader gets 1. So we're using 6 against 7. That's the -1 column for the Americans. So let's just roll the Americans first, and we'll attack. Also, the leader also gets attacked. So all the units involved will be attacked separately, but using the same -1 column. So in the -1 column here, and we don't have to worry about modifiers. The only way we're going to eliminate the Japanese unit is to roll a 12. Everything else is basically no result because of they cannot, casualties. 10, 11, 12 will do something. Anything other than that is going to be nothing. So we get a 4 against the leader. First rifle squad gets a 5, so that's nothing. And then we get a 9, which is still nothing, unfortunately, for the Americans. So they do no damage to the Japanese. So now let's do the Japanese side. We know their attack is an 8 and the Americans' defense is a 4. So they're in the 4 column, which really benefits the attacker. And they can do breaks and shakes on the broken and shaken on the Americans. So this is going to be interesting. There's only 1 unit to attack. And we roll an 8. And an 8 in the 4 column is casualty and shaken. Okay, so they're going to take a casualty, and that's the first casualty points against the Americans. And they also get a shaken. Well, we have to roll for this, so let me put that down. We now have to roll for our gut check. So our gut check number for the Americans in this scenario is a 6. So you roll 2 dice. If you roll a 6 or higher, they pass the gut check. And they rolled a 5, so they are shaken. So that's a bad result for the Americans. Okay, after combat, all broken and shaken units are retreated to adjacent hexes by the owning player. So they have to back out. So they will back out. The foxhole remains, and they back up there. And that allows these guys to move up into their hex, and they both are marked used, even though this really doesn't matter because we're going to do the cleanup next. So that is melee. So now you've seen melee, and we can move on to cleanup and basically remove unit markers, score victory points, which doesn't have. Then we go end of turn, and that will be the end of turn 4, and we'll go to turn 3.